So now that you understand all of the elements that make up a projection and what projections are, we can start talking about the different types of projections. And there's 4 types of projections that we're going to be talking about. So the first one is called a nested projection. Second one is a coverage projection. The third one is a patch projection. And then the fourth one, and probably the most common, is a combination projection, which is a combination of any of those first 3 together. So all projections are made up of these types of projections, which, there's only 4 of them, so they're pretty straightforward. Although when you get into a shot, it can be quite complex. And so what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be going over these different types of projections in diagram form. And then later on in the course, we are going to do some hands-on exercises that will get you much more familiar with how these different projection types work. The first one on our list is the nested projection. So a nested projection is a projection inside of another projection along the shot camera path. So anytime that a camera is pushing in or pulling out in an extreme way to either show more detail in the matte painting or more of the matte painting, then you'll need to use a nested projection. One of the most noticeable uses of a nested projection are those shots where you start out in outer space and the camera zooms in to the planet and goes past all these clouds and goes right in through somebody's bedroom window. And so that type of shot is actually called the powers of 10 or a powers of 10 shot. And that name comes from a short film made by IBM actually called Powers of 10. And I'm going to just show you a clip really quick of this. And you can see here that you're starting out on the earth on this guy and the camera is pulling out. At some point, the resolution of the matte painting is going to break, or you're going to run out of matte painting. And so think of each of these little squares as a matte painting. So each one of those could be, let's say, I don't know, a 10K, 10,000 pixel wide image that's being projected onto a surface. And the camera can keep pulling out and pulling out and pulling out because you have wider and wider and wider matte paintings to show. So if that doesn't, this is a really good illustration. I would highly recommend going and taking a look at this. However, if this is not clear to you about how to set it up, that's okay. Like I said, we're going to be going through and taking a look at real practical applications of these and how to set these up. The next projection type is called the coverage projection, and that simply is overlapping layered projections along a shot camera path. And so think of this as a camera that is sweeping from left to right, and you need more than one painting to have enough coverage of that area. And so you may have, if you're looking at the street and then the camera move ends up and looking at the sky, then you have one painting that is for the street, and then you have another painting that is for the sky, and they are overlapping each other. And so in that way, you are getting coverage through your projection, and you're doing it through multiple projections. So this projection would be one matte painting, and this projection would be another matte painting. So the next camera projection that we're talking about is called a patch projection. This is where you have a hero projection that's projecting an image onto some geometry, and because of the camera moves to one side and it starts to break the matte painting. And what I mean when I say breaking the matte painting, it's the doubling and smearing that happens. And so I'm going to be talking about that in just a second. But this patch projection will fix all of those areas where it's breaking. And so, and that actually, for the next one, this is a little bit of a variation on that, which is where a camera projection is put on top of a 3D render. So let's say you have this great 3D render of this city, and this camera is floating through this city, but there are some parts of the render that are broken, that they can't get to fix. So oftentimes you'll just have one projection that fixes the CG render, and it's projected back onto that same geometry. When you're setting up your projections, there's three projection artifacts that you have to deal with, or three problems as a result of your projections that you're always having to deal with. And the solution to all three of these is actually create more projections. And so you will have these three different types, which is called smearing, doubling, and resolution. So the resolution one, that one is easy. If you're doing a nested projection and you're pushing in on a matte painting, at some point the matte painting is going to look pixelated or smear or really fuzzy. And the solution there is to put a new projection there that's higher resolution when the camera pushes in. And so in all three of these cases, it's because of the moving shot camera that creates these problems. And like I said, the solution is just to create more projections. Projection smearing is where the matte painting is smearing or streaking across the glancing angle of an object. So this right here is kind of the glancing angle of the object. It's really thin right here. And so if this is the matte painting, it looks great from this point of view. But when you move around the object, you can see, like up here on the roof and across here on the side, right here on the side, it's starting, you can see that it's starting to smear, like this window right here is starting to smear across. And let's say that this is 300 pixels right here. And now this is maybe 1,000 pixels that you see here. So these 300 pixels of your matte painting are getting streaked across 1,000 pixels from this point of view. And you can see it really bad up here, where in an extreme case of where it's really streaking across this image. And like I said, the solution, to projection smearing is from this point of view. If this is where the camera ends, you just create a new projection, a new patch projection that will fix these areas. And so you'll have one projection that's taking care of this area, and then you'll have another projection that's taking care of this area right here. The last projection artifact that we're going to be talking about is projection doubling. And so that's when you have a matte painting and it's being projected onto something, but it projects through that object onto another object directly behind. And it's a little bit opposite of what you would expect in the real world, because if I'm standing in front of an overhead projector in the real world, then the image is going to be projected onto me, and then it's going to be black behind me. The image isn't going to go through my body. But in 3D, projections go all the way through objects. And so you can see here, it looks great from this point of view, but this camera right here, it projects onto this building, and the image of this building projects back onto the ground. And if I had another building here, this building would project onto that building. And so when the camera moves, you're seeing all of this doubling that's happening. And the solution, again, to this is to create more projections. So you could create a projection from here that fixes all of these problems, or you could create a projection just for this building and then create another projection for the ground. And so maybe you have a layered projection. Let's wrap up this lecture with a quick word about good projection practices. It is your goal as a matte painter to do things as quickly and as efficiently as possible. And when you're working with projections, it's really easy to get really complex very quickly. So you want to keep things as simple as possible. And the way that you do that is that you have as few of projections as possible. So if you have 3 projections in a setup, maybe you can get away with just 2. Or maybe you can get away with 1 with a hero, like a hero projection and then a patch projection. So every projection is expensive and takes time for you to do. So if you can cut those down, then the better off you'll be. What you want to do next is set up your projection cameras in a way that causes as few artifacts as possible. So that's the doubling, smearing, and any resolution issues. There is a lot of skill and technique associated with setting up projection cameras in a really efficient way. And that is what we're going to be going through in this course, not only teaching you technically what the projections are, how to set them up, but then also how to plan for projections and how to implement that in a shot. And the last one is to set up your projection cameras as close to the camera path as possible, because what you're doing as a matte painter, you're only creating things for the camera. You're not creating a whole world. You're creating a world for just the camera, and that's it. Anything beyond that, you don't really care. And so the farther you get away from the camera path and setting up projections, the farther off you'll be from what it actually looks like in the shot. And so sometimes it's actually a good thing to break from the camera path, but most of the time you want to stick very, very close to the camera path to set up your projection cameras. That's a lot of concepts to throw at you all at once. And if there's anything that you're feeling like you don't really understand quite yet, don't worry. As we go along, you'll get to see how these concepts get practically applied in a like shot scenario. And that's really going to make it click for you. That and the repetition of setting up these projections on your own. So let's get to it.